So Richard Bell is the writer and director of the movie Brotherhood. It shook me deeply. My live conversation with him is here. And we're going to start up the fake book. Are you on fake book? Fake book.
Yeah, I'm on fake book.
Yeah, fake book. I don't want. I'll take the cheap views right now, and I hope that somebody that's watching is driven over to watch this movie. Richard Bell is the writer and director of the movie called Brotherhood. If you're searching it on the net, search Brotherhood movie 2009, because I think there's another movie called Brotherhood.
2019.
19, exactly. Sorry.
Search Star Trek 2009 and search Brotherhood 2019.
I'm dated by at least a decade. Always.
That's okay.
So Richard, really, thank you for your time, and thank you to your PR group, Ingrid, for hooking this up. Maybe just start out a little bit about telling us a little bit about who you are, maybe not what you do, but like who are you as a human being, Richard?
Who am I as a human being?
It's always the toughest question.
I would say that I'm a storyteller first.
Okay.
I am a truth seeker. I would say I'm a treasure hunter. And I am very attracted to true stories, especially stories from the past. They have always fascinated me. I'm a bit of a history buff, not in an academic way, but I do love finding stories from the past. I think that in Canada we have so many stories that are so amazing and that have such a great cool factor to them, but we don't celebrate them like the Brits do or like the Americans do. Especially the Americans. The Americans love stories from their past. We don't even know that half of them exist, or we feel shy or embarrassed, or we don't think that they're worth celebrating. So in that sense, like when I say treasure hunter, that's how, I tied into introducing you to Brotherhood, which is that, I found a tiny little story about this true story about the Brotherhood of St. Andrew, in a newspaper when I was living in Toronto in 2006. And it was just a tiny story about an 80th anniversary mass that was being put on for the Brotherhood of St. Andrew and their ordeal on Balsam Lake. And there wasn't very much there, but it just captured my imagination. And then I went hunting for treasure. That's when I started. Like at the time, there was not really anything about them and their ordeal on the lake, on the internet. So I researched it through my public library here in Vancouver. And then, of course, all the microfiche are all scanned now. So it's a lot easier to do research. But yeah, I'm a treasure hunter and a storyteller. I like looking for things and finding things and laying my imagination around real events.
Awesome. Now, tell us a little bit about the premiere. I saw you went back to Balsam Lake and really just took over the community with this release. And, this has got to be, dude, I was so moved by this film. And like we said offline just before we started here, I'm a tough nut when it comes to movies. I find myself saying, well, doesn't anybody make any good movies anymore? I haven't been really moved by a movie since, I don't know, Jacob's Ladder, with Angel Heart. Like they're decades old.
Yeah.
And wow, the acting was just great. I knew nothing about the history and the story, and so I looked it up a little bit, not enough to spoil the story for the movie when I watched it, and I watched it yesterday. Just incredibly moved. The acting, the cinematography, wow. And you expect, and I've learned this, I've got a friend in town here who's a movie producer, and I expected that when he did a movie, that it was going to look like The Beachcombers. It was going to be bad. It was going to be bad acting. It was going to be horrible scenery. It looked like it was shot on, I don't know, an Instacam. Yeah. And this dude, Jason Lupish is his name. He did a movie called Fight, and he did what a beautiful thing. Anyway. When I saw it, now he's a homer. He's my hometown guy, but man, he made this thing look like Hollywood. And it doesn't mean that if you're a Canadian, or even if, I'm not saying you're low budget, but even these small filmmakers have a way of telling a story and making it look Hollywood, for lack of a better term. So I was really moved, watched it 1.5 times. Caught the first half and went back to picked up from the first third and went and watched it again last night. And I had trouble getting to sleep last night, bro. It was really messing with my mind a little bit. So, and not like from a horror standpoint. Yeah. And this is what really got me. I thought it was beautiful. Now, I don't want to give the story away. You can tell as much of the story as you want. As far as I know, it's historical. It's you can look it up. But I thought, what a beautiful film. And it's not it's not a feel good film in any. No. It is, but it is. It leaves you
but it isn't. Yeah.
It leaves you hopeful in this strange way out of a complete tragedy. Somehow, my mind was racing and laying in bed last night, and I had an early morning today, and I'm like, go to sleep. And my mind just wouldn't shut off. So that's a testament to your talent, brother. I really appreciated it.
Thank you. Wow. Wow. Thank you. That's what every filmmaker, I'm sure, wants to hear. Let me back up a bit and explain why it looks so good. I had an exceptional, extraordinary director of photography. And his name is Adam Suika, and he, speaking actually of horror, he did a lot of films with George A. Romero, and he shot The Haunting in Connecticut. But he's like Adam Suika is kind of like a cross between a poet, like a poet like Byron, and a mad scientist, and that's the kind of DP you need, and he's like a dream for any kind of director. He's also like 25 years older than me,
wow.
which was so important, which was so great for our relationship. Like,
what, just the wisdom?
Yeah, well, he brought something. He was just so different than me, but yet so similar. So, like, when we were interviewing cinematographers, it came down to two. It was Adam and this really great female cinematographer, and she was fantastic, and she came into the interview, and she really understood the script and the emotion, and she almost had me bawling my eyes out, and I wanted to hire her. And then when I met Adam, we didn't really quite connect, and we were talking different languages, and he was very technical. And at first, he came across as being really technical and very specific. And if he were a high school class, he'd be math and science, and I'd be like English and social studies with lunch thrown in, right? So it didn't feel like we were talking the same language. So I was going to hire the other cinematographer, and then I thought, do you know what? I don't need another me, because she felt very much like me, like
right.
And I was again to bring up Star Trek. I felt like Captain Kirk doesn't need another Captain Kirk. He needs a Spock. And Adam definitely filled that role of being the Spock, like being the technical wizard. And, we had so many things that were going to be very complicated with the shoot of Brotherhood, shooting on a real lake with miners and chasing weather. And so much of Brotherhood is about the light and getting the light right. Also, there was stuff in a tank with green screen. It involved like a lot of technical work. So the fact that Adam was and is such a pro, and kind of like from like an old Hollywood kind of world, even though he's mostly worked in Canada, like he's actually in Video Village smoking a stogie. And I'm going, right? Like he's... we had a scene that we shot like when a thunderstorm was like a real thunderstorm was coming to a close, and the gaffers were like, oh, union rules, we can't go up on a ladder and, for like at least 45 minutes until the last thunderstrike. And Adam was just like, Monday, like I was like, when I was shooting that movie for George Romero, I was on a roof and it was raining, but that's the kind of guy I needed, right? And then later I found out, or not later, but during the process of shooting Brotherhood, it's just like, man, this guy is like a Renaissance poet. This guy's like a Restoration era poet as well, so he really understood what I wanted to achieve. So I think that the reason why the film looks so good and so sumptuous, and we were going for not a Hollywood look, but an old Hollywood look. We were going for that classic, like my favorite filmmaker is David Lean, right? So like say like a mini Lawrence of Arabia kind of mini epic sort of feel. So just having Adam as my lieutenant, I think was the reason why the film looks the way it looks.
Awesome. So that's a little bit about who and why, and I really appreciate you giving the love to the people that helped you, and I'll give you more opportunity to do that. I'm sure there's many more people you want to thank, but tell us a little bit about the script, the plot, and why you were attracted to the story in the first place.
So Brotherhood is based on a true story about a 1926 tragedy that happened on Balsam Lake in the Kawarthas. There was the Brotherhood of St. Andrew Leadership Group, which is an Anglican group, which is out of St. James Cathedral in Toronto. They went to Balsam Lake for a 2-week holiday, like 2 weeks of, watercraft and sitting around a campfire, archery lessons, paddling lessons. And on the second night there, they set off across the lake in a 30-foot Indian war canoe, which is a very tippy canoe. It was not a great idea to set out with so many boys and so late. And they were broadsided by a wave, like a summer squall kicked up. And now that I've been to the real Balsam Lake, I can attest to you that these storms do come from nowhere, and sometimes they last like 5 minutes. It's extraordinary. The boys went tumbling into the wash, and the movie Brotherhood is about their quest to stay alive. It's a survival story about them trying to grip and hold on to the canoe for dear life. And it's a transformative story. It's about boys becoming men within the course of one evening, and there's a ticking time clock. It's who's going to survive until morning. I mean, that's what happens in the film. And when I discovered the true story, when I was doing my research, it was like, okay, well, this is what happens: A, B, C, D, E, F. But as a screenwriter, it's my job to figure out what the movie is about. So, the movie isn't just about this accident. It's like one of the bigger themes here. So for me, it was very exciting to get my hands into the guts and figure out what was the theme. And for me, it's a story about boys becoming men and the whole male condition. But also a lot of that is really informed by the decade before 1926, which was totally about the Great War. The camp leaders were veterans of the Great War, and these boys were, the generation that grew up fatherless. Maybe even the first generation, that we're aware of, in fairly modern times. Boys who were left fatherless by the Seminole conflict, or their dads did come home from the war, but when they came home, they were the shell of the men that they once were. So I think any story that's about fatherless boys or boys who are rudderless or apathetic or alone, who are coming together, I think that speaks to an audience today. So that was very exciting for me.
It certainly does. And you don't have to agree with me, but I really feel like masculinity is under attack right now for a number of different reasons from a number of different fronts. And there's so much symbolism in this film, which I appreciated. A lot of times that stuff will skate over me. I'll just be appreciating the film. But those boys laying on that overturned canoe, I don't feel like we have an initiation of boys to make them men these days. And,
no, we don't.
We used to have, when we came from tribes in the Amazon, and there's still tribes in the Amazon that practice this ceremonial. They almost take the 10 or 11-year-old boy off the mother's tit, for lack of a better, like they're still breastfeeding way late into life, and they're taken in this dramatic dance. The elders come across the bridge from the island, and they grab this boy, and he's screaming, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," and the mother plays into this, and then they abscond with him across the bridge to the island where he's kept for a year, and the boy is killed, figuratively, for lack of a better term, and he comes back a man. Now, I'm 51 years old, never married, no kids. I can get with that. Because, you have different, when your son is born or when you're married, or, there's all these different phases of your life where the boy's kind of chipped away and chipped away and chipped away. And some of us never get that chipping. And it was Man, it was really cool. Wow, the acting is just out of this world, you know. And that's another thing I expect is, well, it's a Canadian movie. I expect someone to suck really bad in this movie,
like some kind of wooden, stinky
yeah.
Canadian acting. Yeah,
And just watching them, you know, whether they were at the camp or on the back of this overturned canoe, I just felt like, wow, this is really symbolism that represents the killing of the boy and the making of a man.
yeah, and we don't have ritual anymore. We don't have initiation. You know, when I was growing up, my parents put me in Boy Scouts. I was a Beaver, and then I became a Cub, and then I became a Scout. I didn't love scouting, but I liked it a lot. You know, like I had friends there. I didn't love it so much because I didn't really like the camping aspect, but I'm glad that I did it. Growing up in a Catholic family, we were in catechism, which is like Sunday school, but on a Wednesday or a Thursday. My brother and I were in Squires in the Knights of Columbus. We were always busy with swimming and different activities. I was a sporty kid and I hated sports, but thankfully my family let me do things that weren't team sports like judo or swimming or something I could handle. I think the problem today is, and you know, also this is something that Robert, the camp leader, felt that was happening at this time.
He was. What a great character! Wow, he was perfect.
Well, he was a veteran of the First World War, and you know, the concern that we have about the state of boyhood right now, that happened then in the 1920s. It's kind of like why the Boy Scouts were formed. Like it was, you know, Lord Baden-Powell, I think, in 1912. It was the beginning of the modern Olympics in the early 1910s. Mm-hmm. People were concerned about the state of boyhood. They were concerned that they were spending too much time sitting in front of the radio. You know, we could say internet now. You know, they were worshiping movies that were about gangsters in the 1920s. We could say that now. So that's why Robert took those boys on that camp, on that lake, to kind of push them out. He believed that, you know, boys needed time, like, you know, rubbing elbows with one another. He wanted to see grass-stained sleeves. We need that now, like, you know, and some of the books that I used in my research for Brotherhood was Iron John, which is a book that came out in the 70s, and I think it was re-released in the 90s, which is the story of boyhood and manhood through myth, which is, you know, akin to, you know, what you said about your story about the Amazonians, you know, boys going through rites of passage and how important that was. Or boys being mentored, you know, tribal chieftains, knights and squires. Robert Butcher believed in the power of knights and squires as well.
Elders.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and it's funny that, because like when you look at, like, say, video games, I feel kind of mixed feelings about it, because should boys spend all their time on the Xbox? No, they shouldn't. But then there's also, like, people who believe philosophically, even scientifically, that boys are attracted to video games because they feel a sense of accomplishment from getting to level to level to level. And that boys' brains, which we have to admit are just different than girls'
No.
brains.
We're all the same, dude. We're all the same. Our sexual differences are nil. They're none. You can't say that here because YouTube will shut me down, dude. You can't have outrageous takes like that.
Okay. Fine. We're all the same. We're all one big gelatinous lump that came out of the primordial ooze, and we're all the same. I don't know, like that.
No, the processing of the male brain, though. Make your point. Sorry to interrupt. I won't do that.
No, that's okay. Well, I mean, there's been, you know, plenty of studies that suggest that there's actually value in boys going to a boys' school and being in an all-boy environment. Boys and girls learn differently. It's not that one is better than the other. Boys are more action-oriented and also are more rambunctious. And more rough and tumble, and boys these days get punished for that, which I find to be kind of frightening.
Well, the idea is sit still and be good like the girls in your class, and everything's good. But if you're ADHD or you're hyperactive or you can't sit still or you didn't burn off your estrogen, your testosterone in the playground, and you bring it back into the classroom, you're going to end up with the strap in the principal's office.
Well, there's a story just even recently in the States about this kid getting expelled or suspended because he was going around the classroom going pew, 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 right? And to him, I'm guessing that was like a Star Wars moment. And to the parents, it was, this kid is the next Columbine killer.
It's a microaggression.
Well, but that's very concerning to me because, and I also, I think it's concerning to women. I think it's concerning to mothers. I have friends who are mothers to boys, and they're like, I think that they wonder, like, how do we raise boys today? Because you want the manly middle ground. You want that, that sweet spot of you want a gentleman, right? You don't want the toxic masculinity. You don't want the Donald Trump. But also, like, why are we stripping away the qualities that are inherent to boys and trying to make them into something that they're not? It's funny, my brother's grandparents-in-law, they went to church last Christmas, and they came home with a flyer from the priest. And I think that the priest had been receiving a lot of complaints about kids being naughty during Mass. And all it said on the flyer was, God put the wiggle in little kids. And I was just like, wow, that's amazing. Like when we talk about hyperactive kids, especially boys, it's like God put the wiggle in little kids, it's just like they're not formed yet.
No.
And I think that young boys and guys, I think they need to go down to the riverbank to forage for frogs. I think they need to build a tree fort. I think, like, for me, I don't want to say boys have to play team sports, because I hated team sports. But I loved being outdoors. And for me, I used to walk around like Cub Camp when we'd go on hikes, and I'd go like this, and I'd film it in my brain. I didn't know that it was supposed to be this, but I'd film it like this. And I would pretend I was on the forest moon of Endor, or, when I was on Cub Camp. So, also, and it's not just boys, it's girls as well. We need to get back outdoors. And one of the other books that I read when I was researching Brotherhood was by Dr. Richard Louv, which is called Last Child in the Woods. And it's about nature deficit syndrome, which is a real thing.
Really?
Yeah, nature is curative. The human being needs to spend time outdoors. And this culture that we live in now, and both my brother and my sister-in-law are high school teachers, and they tell me about it all the time. Like, do you remember, I'm a bit younger than you, but it was like, be home by the time the street lamps were on. Mm-hmm. Now it's just like, be home, where are you? Texting. It's just like, we're creating a generation, and it's probably my generation or our generation, like the Gen Xers, we're creating a generation of, like, babies.
Softies, yep.
And bringing it back to Brotherhood, I think that's what Robert Butcher was concerned about with, his brood. Now, the difference between Robert and the other camp counselor named Arthur, who's played by Brendan Fletcher, is that they come at educating young boys from different angles.
Sure.
Whereas Robert, he actually says in the movie, risk builds character. And Arthur says challenge builds character, right? And in many ways, Robert is wrong. Like, he's the architect of this disaster. He was well-intentioned, but there's, what is acceptable risk? Mm. It's like the story of, when we were shooting, there was that drowning in Algonquin Park. That kid drowned, and it was determined that he couldn't swim, and the teacher was found culpable for that. Again, my brother and sister-in-law, being teachers, when they heard this, they were horrified, because what educator once would actually put one of their students in harm's way? It's like, it's the parents who caused that. Like, the parents, the kid shouldn't have gone to camp. And even like when we were doing Brotherhood, like, we had cast, and we found out that one of the kids didn't know how to swim, and he had lied in his audition about being able to swim, and we let him go, because you can't mess around with that, right?
You cut him loose. You mean you didn't put him in the film? Yeah.
we had to cut him loose,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
no, I
Which was
appreciate
like a devastating phone call for me. But
Wow.
it's like, if you can't swim and we're shooting the movie this quickly and in such a short amount of time, like when I was casting Brotherhood, like I said to the casting director, I was like, I need like hockey players. Like I need like guys who are, and they kind of all were, although I don't know if they're hockey players or not, but like you need like good Canadian kids who like the outdoors, who, you know, 'cause in the movie you see them, they're doing backflips, they're swimming, they're, you know, they're flying around, they're doing a human pyramid. Like I kind of like needed athletes for this movie, which is again so funny because I'm so not an athlete myself. But
now, just going back to the kid that lied to get into the movie, man, that for me, it's instantly, the impact of integrity is instantly there for me. You know, you've got responsibility, like in the real world, you're shooting a film, and you find out that somebody's lied on their resume to get a job, and this is not something you want to lie about. This is life and death. You're doing a movie about life and death, but it just seems surreal to me and kind of ironic that here you are shooting a movie about the kids drowning, and there's an actor that's lying about the fact that he can swim, and I just like immediately drawn to the irony of the impact of the lack of integrity could cost you your life.
Well, I don't know if he actually lied. Like, this is what happened. We were paddling. We had a paddling practice for the war canoe. It was the first time we were getting the actors together. And we were at Ashbridges Bay in Toronto, and it was a balmy beach club, and we had hired like a really good war canoe coach. And right when the guys were about to get on the war canoe, one of the kids' mothers went up to one of the actors, the older actors who plays a camp counselor, and said, "Oh, do you mind keeping an eye on my son? He can't swim." And the actor came to me and said, "Oh, I already feel like a camp counselor because one of the moms came up to me and said blah, 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 blah." And I said, "What?" And the older actor, felt so badly for letting the cat out of the bag, but I was just like, "Thank you for telling me." And so I discussed it with the casting director, and the casting director was like, "We need to let him go." And so, like, when I talked to the young guy, I was like, "I'm so sorry, but your mom kind of talked you out of a job." And that kind of maybe happens a bit with stage moms, like they're kind of like their own unique animal. But like, I'll tell you this, like, if anyone gets injured on a film set, it's the first AD, the first assistant director, will never work again.
Wow.
Like, that's just the way it is. And people who don't really quite understand the film industry kind of think that the director is, the almighty. The director, we're really not the almighty. The producer is the almighty. They sign the checks. On the set, the management of the set is the first AD. He runs the set.
Okay.
I say action and cut, and sometimes he says action and cut. But if someone gets injured on a film set, the first AD just won't work again.
Wow.
So even like our star Brendan Fletcher, he came on quite late. Like, he was cast like a week before we started shooting. But if you do a little bit of research, he was injured on the set of a TV of a TV show, like on a major network, and it really affected him. Like, he had a fake gun go off, and the blank hit him in the neck, and he had to have an emergency. Is it tracheotomy? It happened in Sudbury, and like, Brendan Fletcher is like the most fearless, probably the most talented actor I know. And I saw how that affected him. I saw how that took someone who was very courageous. I could see how that affected him emotionally. And it was a big moment in his life. And it was just a moment of him, like, his character had to commit suicide or pretend to commit suicide. So our first AD was, obviously very cognizant about keeping the set as safe as possible, because you're dealing with minors and you're dealing with a real lake, and then you're dealing with a water tank. There's like, things can go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Now, I got so many questions for you. Richard Bell is my guest. He's the writer and director of Brotherhood movie. If you're Googling it, put 2019 in front of it so you get the right movie, because there is another movie named with the same name, I guess.
Okay.
how many of these conversations were legit and historical, and how many survivors are there still around that you were able to hang with and get the stories from? Like, how much of this is fiction versus, Hollywood storytelling versus actual, this is what happened, this is what he said to me before he did such and such?
Wow, it's really interesting because there's a point as the writer and the director. There's a point where I stopped being the writer. I stopped being the screenwriter, and right. I had to move on to my new job, which was being the director. So when I felt like the script was done or I felt like it was cooked, I moved on to looking at it from a director's point of view. I'm saying that because when I went back and I looked at some of the historical documents and newspaper articles from the past, the scanned microfiche, I was actually quite surprised by how closely I followed the actual story of that night.
Wow.
So yes, I did use my imagination to fill in a lot of the blanks, but there are some lines in there that are direct quotes from the newspapers at the time.
Oh.
And there's things that are true, like, Oliver Mardell, played by Evan Marsh, he did work at the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company. Mm-hmm. One of the guys, like maybe it wasn't Leonard, but maybe it was another character. His father drowned. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of details in there that are true, like the story about the watch, the wristwatch stopping when the accident happened, when the boy fell in the lake. There's so much stuff that's true. There's a few things that I had to move around, mm-hmm. and I also had to create some composite. I had to condense some characters because in real life there's 11 boys who went out,
okay.
And in the movie it's or who died, and then in the movie it's 8. Because it was, for me, it was more important that you be able to follow the individual streams of the characters, like the character arcs, than to be historically accurate. Like with 11 people, you would not be able to track the characters.
So there's 11 in total?
So there's 11 in total who died and 4 who lived. In the movie,
there's 15 of them in that canoe.
In real life, yeah.
Okay, and in your story there was 10?
There was something like that. I don't know. I told you I'm not math and science. That's Adam Suika.
So I will assume there's no survivors then. There's no one left alive to tell the story?
Well, I can't say that I did an exhaustive search to find out who was still alive, even though I do, I admitted earlier to being a treasure hunter. For me, it was less. For me, the whole story took place in the 3 days. Mm-hmm. And the future, like what happened afterwards, wasn't as interesting to me, nor did I think it informed the movie in any meaningful way. So, like the first draft of the movie took place in the Lindsay Town Hall, and it was about the Inquisition, into the accident, and we went back in time and ping-ponged that way. But that just felt like a television movie, so I threw out the inquest completely, because it was like, it just felt too academic and boring. For me, it was way more important to look not to the future as to what happened to these characters or to their descendants. It was all my time was spent in the past. And for me, that meant going to the 1910s and looking at the culture there, and also investigating and throwing myself into the world of the First World War.
Mm. Tell me about going back to Balsam Lake for the premiere. That I saw a little bit about it online. I'm not sure where exactly, but I was just like, I'm like, hey, I'm going to interview this guy today. And I'm like reading the synopsis and blah, blah, blah. And then I read that, and he's like, really? Dude, that's so cool. He says, I know Balsam Lake. I've been there. I'm like, me too.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit that was something that was always in our marketing plan, which was to do a screening at Balsam Lake in the real community where the accident happened. I didn't know that it was going to be the first screening. Like, I didn't know it was going to be the debut screening.
Okay.
So there was obviously a lot of poetry and beauty, associated with that. Mm-hmm. I could not have done it if it weren't for a fellow who lived on the lake. His name is Doug Patterson. He's a banker. He works in Toronto, but he like everybody in Ontario, they're very passionate about cottage culture, and he has a cottage on Balsam Lake that's been in his family, I think, since the 18th century, late 18th century. And it was interesting because he contacted me just through Facebook, and he said, I was always fascinated about the story the true story about the Brotherhood of St. Andrew, and I used to go to church, and there was a plaque hung up that had all the boys' names who drowned. And when I did my research trip out to Balsam Lake in 2011, I found the minister who, took care of that church, and it's just this tiny church called St. Thomas in Kirkfield, and I saw that same plaque. So it was interesting to talk to Doug, because he was like, yeah, I was 10 years old, and I used to look at that plaque, and I wouldn't even pay attention to what the priest was saying. I was just wondering what happened that night to those boys. So he was the one who organized the Balsam Lake and Kirkfield hometown screenings, and he did that in tandem with the curator of the Kirkfield Museum. So, I mean, it takes a village to make a movie. It takes a village to put on any kind of premiere, right? So I was in Vancouver, and I was talking to Doug and the Kirkfield people, and they put together, kind of like a world-class event. And they were very open to my ideas, and they had a lot of great ideas themselves. And they, Doug put his money where his mouth was, which was like, he was like, I want the actors here. So he paid for Brendan Fehr to come up from New Mexico. He paid for Brendan Fletcher to come from Vancouver, me to come from Vancouver. And he hosted us and put us up in his cottage. And it was great, because the actors loved it. They felt like, the stars that they are, they deserve that. And we went out on the lake, and we approximated the spot where the boys drowned. The minister who I, was in Congress with in 2011, she came. We did a dedication to the boys. The actors threw flowers into the lake, for their character, for the character they played. It was incredibly moving. The Lieutenant Governor of Ontario came, Elizabeth Dowdeswell, and some of the crew came. We had a dinner at the Kirkfield, the Lions Club, and it was funny, because I was sitting next to Brendan Fehr, and Brendan Fehr's been in the industry forever, and he was bad boy, kind of like matinee idol in the late 90s, early 2000s, when he was on the television show Roswell. And, he's kind of seen it all. And he was sitting next to me at the dinner. And it was, I'm sitting next to the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. And he was like, wow, there's something really yesteryear about this experience. He's like, when was the last time that a community gathered for dinner and a movie? The priest, she said, grace, and we bowed our heads in grace. And it reminded me of when I was actually in Cubs, and we'd have something called the father-son banquet, which now you could never do, because that would be so politically incorrect, right? But the fathers and the sons sat down, and we broke bread, and there was this real feeling of, community, and you're breaking bread, and everybody was so excited. And the actors were kind of bouncing off the walls and were posing for pictures. And then when dinner was finished, and it's like, and all the people in the kitchen are like the old ladies who you would see in the kitchen. And this one lady's telling me off for not eating my dinner fast enough. And are you done with that, hon? And there's just something really special and authentic about that.
Wow.
Then we went across the street, and we went to the museum, and we put on the film, and, they had blacked out the windows because it's an old Presbyterian church, and they had decorated it. They had put tents underneath the movie screen and put up paddles, and there was a real feeling of hometown pride. And it was a very interesting moment for me, because I think every filmmaker sort of wants to have their premiere at TIFF, right? But it's just kind of like, well, do you have your premiere at TIFF, and are you one of many films, and then kind of nothing happens? Maybe you go to a party afterwards, and you eat spinach dip out of a carved bread bowl, and you chat and say, wow, we had a movie at TIFF. Or do you have your premiere where the actual true story of your movie happened,
and connect with the community,
with that kind of sparkle in the air, that kind of, a little bit of pomp and pageantry because the Lieutenant Governor was there, but also that kind of enthusiasm and magic. And that happened again also because the Lieutenant Governor really loved the movie, and she wanted to do a screening at Queen's Park for Remembrance Day. So I just got back from Toronto because of that. So that was on November 7th. Yeah, so because of the backstory of the First World War, because of the
Right.
Great War, she was like, I want to do a screening for active military and for veterans.
Wow.
So we had like active Canadian Forces personnel there. There was a veteran there who had like, a friend of mine was there. He's a veteran of Afghanistan. And he said, I have never seen a, what is the highest medal? The Medal of Valor, or it was like the most prestigious medal that a veteran could have, and he said, "I have never seen that medal on a living person before." And it was this old timer, and he was just like, "Yes, he had stormed, the beaches of Normandy." And he's like, "What's this movie all about, young man?" And I told him, and I said, "If I hear any snoring, I know it's you." And he's like, "I won't fall asleep, don't you worry." And what a pleasure to like have a screening. Again, it was just so different. Like, it wasn't a film festival, it wasn't like an industry event, but here we are in the Lieutenant Governor's suite at Queen's Park. 4 days before Remembrance Day, the cast is there, the crew is there, the veterans are there. And we watched the movie. And so I feel yes, I've orchestrated these things, and I'm not saying that these just happened by accident or fell in my lap. And definitely they took a lot of work. I don't like being called lucky because I have to do so much work to get these things. But I definitely feel very blessed. And like things like having a screening, in Kirkfield on Balsam Lake or in Queen's Park, those things are pure magic to me.
Wow, that's awesome. Any revelations, impacts, obviously outside of, the impressiveness of an unexpected actor or something like that, but the concept of the film and over the period of shooting, was there anything that really impacted you, seriously and deeply moved you during, something you got that you didn't expect to get out of the making of this movie? Flat-footed, look at that. Wow.
Well, no, because I'd have to say no, because the movie took so long to make. I had worked on it for about 9 years. And
really?
So there was no kind of real surprises when the movie actually started taking off, because I was so well prepared and everything. It's kind of like thinking about a symphony almost all your life and then just getting up there and conducting that symphony. It's like, well, what are the surprises? It's like, well, no, there really aren't any surprises, because this is actually, I can tell you what my surprise is. My surprise is I didn't expect the movie to turn out exactly the way I wanted it to, like it did.
And it did.
Yeah. That's the thing that surprised me the most. So, but it also doesn't surprise me in the capacity that I was very well prepared. Mm-hmm. And there was like a lot of drawings that were done and mood boards and color schemes. And the actors were given so much. I made them read 3 books. Like I made them read Last Child in the Woods,
right.
The Boy Crisis, Real Boys, and Iron John. And I don't know if they all read them, but like they were really put in the world. So the movie very much turned out the way I wanted it. And so there wasn't really any kind of surprises. For me, the moments of impact or being moved by something probably came more in the writing process. Like when, thinking about the boys and thinking about, their ordeal on the lake, perhaps that, people have asked me, was going to the real Balsam Lake, like incredibly moving. And yes, it was, but I would say that I was probably more moved when I went to the cemetery, St. James Cemetery, which is off Parliament Street, which is where they're buried. And Robert's in the center, and he's flanked by like about 5 or 6 of the boys. Like Oliver Mardell is there, Jack Wakington is there. That would be impactful for me, like going and chatting with them. And even just because it took so long to make the movie, just me going to Toronto and kind of giving them an update on how the film was going. Or maybe going and having a chat with them when I had shot the film and before I flew back to Vancouver, saying, okay, we did it. I hope you like it. and seeing that grave, with snow on it, or, in the springtime or in the summertime, or, dusting the leaves off of it. Maybe that has been the most impactful thing for me.
Can you speak to the real-life actors and how they related to their roles and how maybe they had any similarities or anything that jumped out? I mean, I can't imagine being with that many young, talented actors and not just fallen in love with them. I mean, this is a real journey, a storytelling journey, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love actors to begin with, and I definitely understand actors and I the actors' language, and I, I studied to be an actor. I went to Studio 58 here in Vancouver, which is like a conservatory style theater school. So it's kind of like the West Coast version of the National Theater School in Montreal. So I was very much involved with acting in junior high school and high school, and then when I was 19, I went to Studio 58, and then when I graduated at 23, my graduating class had 3 people in it because it was such a difficult school to get through. So I've always had, because I was formerly an actor, I've always had an affinity for actors. And actors are strange beasts. They're very special, magical animals that really, they're all, like, with all these guys, I mean, there was 13, 14 guys. They were all different. They were all completely different people, and they all required something different from me. And it was all about making myself available to these different actors. And I'd only worked with one of them before, Brendan Fletcher. He was in my last film called 18.
How old are these guys?
Pardon me?
How old are these guys, roughly in range?
So the youngest was 14,
okay, and
the oldest was about 25.
Okay.
So they all needed something different from me, and they were all... one of my favorite parts of making the film was casting the movie with my casting director Brian Levy. And he's an old theater school grad, so we spoke the same language when we were casting. So it was very interesting how just having all the different guys come in and it's so interesting because no one lacked talent who came in. It was just. Casting a movie like this, it's just you're playing chess or you're putting together a puzzle. Not only do Jack and Will have to look alike because they're brothers, they have to feed off of each other. You can't you can't have too many guys who look the same. I wanted a redhead, I wanted a blonde. I was always moving the pieces around, right? But they were very easy to fall in love with, and they're still easy to love because they bring such a magic wherever they go, and especially in Balsam Lake. The community just loved them, and at Queen's Park as well. It's kind of like the difference between having canned music play in a room and having a real instrument play in the room. When these actors are in the room, they're just so lovely. And one of the things that I remember about, there was this one actor when we were shooting up in Wawa, there's the craft service table and all the food and the donuts and the muffins and the coffee are out. And this actor was, young teenage actor, probably one of the most successful guys, and had been on 2 TV series and had 155,000 followers on Instagram. And he comes up to me and he's like, yo, Rich, is this up for grabs? And he's talking about the craft service table. And I'm like, yeah, this is all for you guys. He's like, oh, thanks, man. And I was just like, wow, no ego, no attitude. What a cool guy. I don't know, good mom, good dad. What is it? Good Canadian kid? There's a saying in Hollywood, if you want to cast the all-American guy, you have to look to Canada. Wow. And that's why we have Ryan Gosling, or we have Ryan Reynolds, or, Corey Monteith, rest in peace, right? It's like those good all-American guys are actually good old Canadian boys. And that's what I had on Brotherhood. I had good old Canadian boys, good Ontario kids who were raised nicely and were just a real pleasure to work with. The only problem I had with them, challenge I had with them, was that they would just get so rambunctious. And I would have to crack the whip a couple times or say, save it for the camera. Can you do that when we're rolling?
Awesome. Dude, I really appreciate your time, man. And like I said, everyone needs to go see this movie. Where can we see it anyways?
So it premieres on December 6th, Friday, December 6th, at Yonge Dundas. So at the Cineplex there at Yonge and Dundas. Okay. I believe it's opening a week later in Sudbury, but I think that's to be confirmed. We're really hoping that the Toronto screening at Cineplex is the spark that lights the flame and it goes across the country. I mean, definitely for me, I'd love it to open in Vancouver, because, that's where my family is. That's where my friends are. That's where I am. But Toronto's a great start. I think it's very fitting that it's opening obviously in Toronto, because this is a story about a bunch of Toronto boys, and, they're buried like 2 miles away, so I think it's very meaningful. And I'm just happy that it's all actually at a Cineplex as well, because it's screened at Cinefest Sudbury in September, and it was at a Silver City, and that is the way to watch any movie, but like this movie, just seeing it on a 5-story screen with that Dolby 7.1 surround sound. It was my first time seeing the movie like that, and I was like, wow, just wow, So,
Richard Bell is my guest, writer and director of Brotherhood. Wow. Dude, I know you're a storyteller, and I really appreciate the conversation here. Underlying commitment to your, maybe not this movie, but probably kind of a traditional lefty, the arts, I consider myself a lefty too, and kind of like an artist, even though I don't play in a band. I'm not an actor. There's still some artistry to being a host of a show. Yeah. So your underlying commitment for your approach to movies, what would you say that is?
Well, I mean, I've only made 2 feature films and one kind of like short feature. What is my commitment to movie making?
Well, your underlying commitment, like, I don't know, I would imagine that someone like you is like, oh, I'm going to touch, move, and inspire with this story. I'm going to, move people to a positive action. Or I know that's all kind of hokey pokey, but
it's a bit kumbaya.
Yeah, a little bit of tug a tree. But yeah, I just wonder if you have an underlying commitment that kind of runs through your life and then comes over to your storytelling and your movie making of, I want to change the world. I want.
Well, I don't know if it's that. I don't know if I chose movie making or if it chose me. Like, when I was a kid, I was always making films, little videos, with a like in the 80s with camcorders, and I think I made my first movie when I was 13. So it's something that maybe it chose me. Like what I'm doing now is really just the 2019 version of what I was doing in 1986. With probably, hopefully, a more sophisticated talent and better technology and a bigger budget. I don't know if I think this career chose me. I definitely didn't come up with any kind of plan B, which I really should have done, and I'm sure that would have made my mother very happy. I feel like I'm in this industry to stay and succeed, and I definitely haven't. I don't think I've done it the correct way. I didn't go to film school, and I keep getting kind of like corrected and scolded for the way that I do things in filmmaking. That being said, I wouldn't have Brotherhood, and I wouldn't have done 18, 10 years ago if I did it the right way, or if I did it another person's way. I didn't go to, like I said, I didn't go to film school. I want to tell stories. I'm very, very passionate about authenticity. I have no tolerance for things that are inauthentic, or fake, or feel forced. I would rather not be involved with something that's inauthentic. I would rather be broke than do something that's inauthentic.
I think you've nailed it. I think that you've nailed the answer right there, and it doesn't surprise me because I feel like that's an underlying commitment in this film, is the authenticity, and a word that's very important to me with integrity. Honor your word, do what you say you're going to do. There's more to that, all to being a man, and that is a great answer to something that I felt all the way through this film. So. Well, I'm proud of you, brother. I'm really proud of you. And I think you got a winner here. I'm a little biased because, I knew I was doing the interview when I was watching it. So, but dude, if it sucked, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. Seriously, I would not. I don't know you. I didn't know
authenticity.
Yeah, I didn't know that you were, a personable guy like this, I trust Ingrid to hook me up with decent people, so I appreciate that. But that doesn't surprise me at all because, man, there was a lot of wows in this movie for me. And you know what I normally do when I watch a movie? Pause, rewind, pause, rewind. What did he say? Let's turn the captions on. Pause, rewind, dude. Oh, yeah. And I don't want to spoil it for everyone, but I watched it on my phone. I know you don't want to hear that, but I didn't stop it once, Richard. I did not stop it once. I stopped. I watched the first half, and then I went back, and then I watched the last 2/3. And dude, like I said, I'm really proud of you, and I hope that this is the gift that you've earned. I don't think anyone deserves anything. I think you've earned a spot with a decent credit here. And hey, you I had some trouble getting to sleep last night, and I had an appointment I had to get up to take my father to the hospital first thing this morning, and my mind would not shut up. It was, but you know what? That's what a good movie does to you. It keeps you up, whether you're disturbed or just thinking or what have you. So, yeah, I don't know. Telling a stranger I love them and I'm proud of them is kind of weird, but I do.
That's the first time that's happened to me on the internet. No, well, thank you. I mean, the cynicism is easy these days, and right. Apathy is easy these days, and it's too easy. Cynicism is so easy, so it's nice to collaborate with people and work with people, whether it be my actors or my crew or Adam, as I mentioned. Ingrid, like it's just nice to meet people who you feel like what you see, like what you see is what you get, and you're engaging people from, a really authentic place. And an example for that for me is after the Balsam Lake premiere, after spending a weekend with people who were so not cynical and so excited and so happy to be there and so authentic. I kind of went to a dinner party on the way back to Toronto, and I was just with regular people again, and I couldn't take it. I had to say, it was kind of like everyone's masks were back. I was like, I couldn't take it. I was like, what is everyone talking about? And none of this feels real. Like it was, I had to go, oh, please excuse me, I have some emails that I have to attend to, because I just couldn't take it anymore. So it's nice to have one-on-ones and be with people who, have that sparkle, because that's intangible. Like it's just, and you can't teach it. Mm-hmm. You can't teach it. All you can do is hopefully have a life where you have mentors and coaches and teachers, like people like a Robert Butcher or an Arthur Landon, who just chip that away and, and hold you to account and hold you to a higher standard. I don't know. Filmmaking, I think is a contact sport, and it's not pretty, and there's more reasons to not do it than to do it, to be honest with you. It's not easy. But it's a real baptism under fire, and I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change any part of my journey.
Awesome. Anybody else you want to acknowledge for helping you get here, obviously, outside of the actors and whatnot that helped this come to life?
There's just way too many. Okay. There's just way too many, from the funders, financiers, producers, people who move mountains. For me, the people who are really special to me are, as I mentioned, Adam Suika, my cinematographer, my first AD, Paco Bermudez. Being an assistant director on this movie was no easy task. It was really like, wrangling cats. And then just the people I went on the journey with when production ended. It's kind of like you, as a director, you have a series of relationships, like boyfriends or girlfriends after. So Adam was like my first as my cinematographer. And then it was Sarah Petty, my editor. And, when you say, oh, I watched the movie in one sitting and I wasn't bored, it's like that's a testament to her, because, she's given a rock and she has to find the diamond within, right? And we do that together. But to tell a simple story that has a great clip is really hard to do. So Sarah was just like an excellent collaborator for that. And the thing that was really interesting working with Sarah was she historically has done a lot of reality television, editing that. And that just makes for a great editor because, you're given, when you do reality or lifestyle television, you're given hours and hours and hours of footage, and you have to find the story and distill the story and tell it in an articulate and meaningful way. So that makes her a great editor. And then like the next kind of like boyfriend, girlfriend I had, I'd say would have been my sound mixer, Brett Killeran. We spent so much time together getting the sound right. Bill Rowson, my composer, we worked here in Vancouver. He was the assistant to Bramwell Tovey at the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. So he was like the next relationship I had where we were working together very intimately on the score and getting the tapestry of the music right. So it's, it's so funny to me about like the whole kind of push to have female directors because I really feel
who's making that push?
Well, because I feel like people are focusing on the wrong thing. Like movie making is a collaborative sport, is a contact sport, but it's a collaborative process. And it's just like, I think people are giving way too much power to who the director is and what sex the director should be and what, anatomy they have. Because it's like, it's the producer's way more important than the director. And, our producer was female and she's a woman of color and she's a force of nature and she raised the financing to make this movie.
Wow.
So, I mean, like, it's like, our editor was female. It's just kind of like, it's the movie is the director, sure, but it's the producer, it's the editor, it's the cinematographer. It's kind of like looking at a buffet of food and focusing on that should be that when it's just like, no, it's a whole thing, and movie making is the whole dynamic. I don't think it matters like movies don't have a sex. Movies are gender neutral. Why, if anything, movies are female because they're a she, they're like a ship. They're like a great, beautiful, majestic thing. And, I don't get the gender politics of filmmaking because it involves both sexes and it involves every identity to get to tell a great story.
I would concur that movies are female only because the making of them has got to be pure chaos. And we all know that chaos is feminine and order is male.
It's the act of creation, right? It's the act of creation. You're quite literally birthing, not literally, but you're birthing something.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's that gestation period, like for me, it was like, 7 years, and it's the act of creation and, women create. This is probably a bit too deep, but God is probably female just for that reason.
Richard Bell is my guest. The movie is Brotherhood. Man, you look like a very proud father. You look like you got a glow going on there. I really appreciate the time, Richard. Thank you very much.
That's probably just good lighting.
Hey, Richard, for the next movie, I've got an IMDb page. Go check me out. I was walk on, and a buddy's film called me and said, "Hey, you want to fire Erica in the movie tonight?" I'm like, "Dude, seriously?" And but my
you were being Erica?
No, I was. I fired Alex, the female lead in the movie Fight, which is about a single mom that enters the underground bare knuckle boxing world, and I think you'd like it if you check it out. Lupish is the director and screenwriter. Erica Sherwood is the main lead in it, and
are you in Ottawa?
No, I'm in St. Catharines, Niagara. Just down,
gotcha.
Across the street across the lake from Toronto. So I'm an hour to Toronto, but 10 minutes to Niagara Falls. So right on the border.
Hopefully the movie will come to your neck of the woods because I know that a lot of people have been putting requests into the TIFF film circuit. And I thought for the TIFF film circuit, you had to have shown at TIFF, but I don't believe that that's true. I believe that it could be any Canadian film. So if theater owners and exhibitors request the movie, hopefully it'll pick up because we showed at a tiny little film festival in Halliburton a month ago, and it's it was so well attended, and they added a matinee, and I think that Brotherhood has legs in smaller towns. Not that Sudbury was a small town by any stretch of the imagination, but Sudbury was like sold out. It spilled into 3 theaters. But I think that a story like Brotherhood, and with the history being a history-focused movie and such a Canadiana kind of picture, I think it would play well in rural towns and smaller communities.
Richard, thank you very much again, man. It was a really cool conversation. If it comes to TIFF, I will come and see it.
No, it won't come to TIFF.
No,
we didn't
okay.
get it to TIFF.
Okay. But if you ever come, if you're ever traveling down this way, I'd be glad to pick you up again. And on your next project, keep me in touch. And a great amount of thanks to Ingrid as well for hooking this up.
She's the best.